Super Supportive by Sleyca. Chapter 216, The Snake-Shaped Letter, Part 1. A note from Sleyca. Some character notes, mostly stolen from the Flash's arc, since I somehow deleted the list I was making specifically for this chapter. Lucille. This is the S-rank strength brute from Alden's obstacle course team who refuses to kill people even in gym class. She wants to be a no-kill hero. During duels, she prefers to pin people to the ground. Winston picked on her a little during the obstacle course because she's scared of hitting people and she was getting flustered by her own mistakes. So it made her easier to kill. Alden gave her a pep talk out on the track when she got caught in one of Max's traps. February. An S-rank agility brute, last seen heading down a staircase on his hands. He has the same instant corner skill as Klein, friends with Ignacio Shrike. Torsten Klein. Instructor Klein is an S-rank agility brute who teaches gym class. He is reluctant to have a rabbit in the hero program. Alden doesn't dislike Instructor Klein, but he's also very aware he doesn't have Klein's full approval. Morrison Waker, aka Big Snake, S-rank morph brute. He has a small and fast mode and a big and strong mode. We almost always see him in big and strong mode. Enjoys working on his pitching, by pitching things at students. Reinhardt. An A-rank Meister of Bow, he shot Alden a lot during combat assessment. He has recently given himself a buzz cut. He helpfully tried to matchmake Astrid and Jeffy, like a proper Cupid when the three of them ended up being left behind at the mall on the night of the Submerger disaster. Although he caused some friction on the team during the first days of the obstacle course, they ended up getting along well with him in the end. Max, B-rank adjuster with his own spells that affect movement. Finlay, Scottish accent, Gokorach Bard. S-rank speed brute who has finally been pushed into actively arguing with Winston. Ignacio, aka Shrike, S-rank Meister of Knives, had a cool POV moment in Flash's chapter 195. Marsha, S-rank Meister of the Mutable Haft, makes amazing strawberry milk and shares it with neighbors and roommates, likes watching Brutal Ring. Likes attacking strong people, dislikes managing her power usage, dislikes chopping wood. Astrid, an A-rank morph brute. Alden quite likes Astrid. She's almost always positive, and they've worked together frequently in gym. They have tentative plans to go see an animal cafe together because Astrid likes animals and Alden wants to hold a chicken. As a beginner morph, she doesn't have a lot of fancy powers that are useful for combat, so she relies on basic brute physicality and, in some cases, the most random surprise attacks she can think of. Jeffy. It's long for Jeff. Grilling with Sharkpaw. Recently affixed a limited ability Sky Sea Guard needed, and waited too long to claim. Soren, an A-rank Shaper of Light, still riding high from frying Winston during the Flash's arc. Tuyet, an S-rank Dartmeister, dislikes social conflict. Quick. One of her brothers is a Sway we saw during the Submerger disaster, living on a boat offshore with others who have some difficulties with their powers. She has plans for vengeance against the unregistered Sway who hurt him. Friends with Vandy and Everly, who she went to school with at Paragon. Roommates with Vandy, Everly, and Maricel. And Jerry, A-rank Shaper of Water, plays hockey. Feeds people to victory. Vandy, S-rank Sky Shaper, was really excited Alden had Happy Eval Days scheduling software, and quite disappointed he didn't want to link it to social media. So I think if you had another one of those, or another device like it hidden behind your shield, and you were being attacked by a strength brute who hadn't felt your skill before, you could get away. With your power being more of an unknown, they'll probably hit as hard as they can to make sure they break through, but then the device would be there. Lucille was holding one hand out and lightly punching it with the other, to represent Alden's shield and the imaginary attack against it. He'd gotten the idea right away, but he was still paying attention and nodding instead of interrupting. It was sweet of her to have spent time since their last fight thinking up a way he might be able to survive an S-rank of her subclass. Albeit a more ignorant S-rank. February flitted a few meters behind her, inverted himself in an aerial, and kept going. Alden refused to turn his head to see what other gymnastics the Agi was doing now that the MPE was over for the evening. It was 1 minute after 7 o'clock. They'd been dueling the whole time. Alden had succeeded in staying on the floor, taking advantage of the entire class period by refusing to fight in ways that allowed his opponents to land devastating blows against his skill. He'd even surreptitiously preserved a breath mint whenever he got the chance. He wanted to do MPE exactly right today, practicing double preservation with the mints, using a small amount of instructor-approved sand to increase his mobility, and trying to find ways to use his magic without completely fatiguing it. He hadn't known when he decided to go that route that he was in for the kinds of battles where he'd actually be tempted to claim his skill was shot, just so that he didn't have to keep his cool around certain people. not Lucille. She'd slapped down his final shield of the day, then pinned him to a dome-shaped obstacle in the dueling block more easily than he could have pinned an actual bunny rabbit. But he had no complaints about it. She'd let go the instant he conceded, and now she was trying to cheer him up by telling him he could buy right-mate gadgets in the future to surprise S-ranks who really wanted to kill him. Since their last duel, her braid had lost its hair tie, and she'd worked up a sweat against opponents more dangerous than him. She was dabbing her forehead with her suit sleeve. I hope she worked up a sweat fighting anyway, and it's not the pressure of making conversation with me. She'd beaten him 3 times. Sticking it out to the end of duels meant a smaller pool of fighters, and that pool was even smaller than usual after all the crap people had pulled this evening. And Lucille had been astonishingly chatty for someone who often limited herself to yes, no, and thank you. For something like a single-use punch returner, you could special order it by second-year uni, she said, brown eyes blinking at him, if you wanted a stronger one than normal, and that way it would definitely be ready for you to start working right after graduation, for emergencies. Thanks. Getting ideas for gear is always interesting. Good duel, or, well, it was a duel, and you were good. Alden would rather spend 2 straight hours losing to her than fight some of the others one more time. He looked around what was left of the class. Several students had been banished, and he'd seen at least one person storm off, despite the instructor's warning everyone after their first dueling day that a string of losses wasn't an acceptable reason to remove yourself from the gym. There was a palpable tension in the room, glares, red faces, people hurrying toward friends to mutter grievances against whomever had pissed them off. Those elites letters, Alden said. I did not expect them to make so many people lose their... He was cut off when Instructor Klein stepped away from a conversation with Big Snake, Foxbolt, and Marion and raised his voice. Class is dismissed. Take care of your suits. Any performance notes we have for you will be in your inboxes tomorrow. I'd like the following people to stay behind for a quick talk. He barked out a few names, then, Alden, what did I do to get named? He'd been making a huge effort to be unflappable for the last half of the class. Astrid, Jerry, Hallyu, Max, and Lucille, and Ignacio, Kleiner finished. It didn't sound like a group deserving of criticism to Alden. These were the people he'd have called out for their composure, actually. They all grouped in the corner where Instructor Klein waited, making eye contact with each other. We trouble? Hallyu texted Alden. Not fair if our. Some of others so much better. I was thinking the same. Few people lagged on their way out of the gym, no doubt hoping to hear what the instructor had to say to a select portion of the class that didn't include them, but a raised eyebrow from Klein had them moving again. When it was only the people he'd called on and the teachers left in the gym, the instructor said, I won't keep you long. I just wanted to thank you all for your level-headedness during today's session. None of you let your tempers get the better of you. Some of you made special efforts to be considerate of your classmates' feelings on a difficult afternoon. The first hour of Friday's MPE class will take place in another room. I'm sure you'll hear about it from the others when they receive the notice. This group will come here instead and work with Instructor Foxbolt and Instructor Waker, like usual. Alden counted heads. Only 10 people. An hour? He's so much madder than I guessed if he's taking a whole hour of gym time away from 3/4 of the class. Please continue to behave as maturely as you did today. Your instructors do notice, even if we're sometimes too busy pointing out problems to offer praise. Good work, that's all. The evening was cool and grey as Hallyu and Alden left the MPE building. They walked to North of North mostly in silence. Alden assumed that, like him, Hallyu was mentally drained and pondering how another school changing the way they handled their own hero program could turn a gym class at its CNH sour. Alden had been curious about what Li Jin was doing earlier today, but he hadn't expected it to matter too much to him. If a few S's jumped ship to go to a new school, he'd miss some of them, but he wouldn't dwell on their absence. It wasn't like someone moving to a different campus was an eternal separation. He'd missed some Anisidoran's social dynamic, or he'd underestimated just how abnormal the group of avowed teenagers who'd succeeded in entering this program with him actually were. The hero track was full of competitive, obsessive overachievers who wanted to be able to beat others in superpowered combat. They had their own reasons for wanting to get stronger. And there were people in the class who didn't completely fit the mold, but the mold was still there, and it shaped how they behave. He and Hallyu came to the spot where they needed to cross the street to reach the main North of North building. A motorcycle passed, followed closely by a woman skating down the road on a spell that allowed her to glide above the pavement. Was a rough class, how you said. People warned me before I started school here that it was possible I'd end up in a class that was the tense kind of competitive with each other instead of the positive kind. But I've liked our group. We've mostly been getting along except for a few people. And then today happened. Alden let his fingers fiddle with the zipper on his duffel bag. Maybe they shouldn't have done duels today. What if we'd done a team activity and we'd ended up with the worst ones, though? It would have been a good day for something like the tower climb again. Yeah, that would have been better. They obviously didn't anticipate a few acceptance letters from Lee Jean making everyone lose their minds. Or they did anticipate it, and this was a psychological experiment to see which of us would crack first. I don't think that's what it was, Alden, but at least if it was, we won! We didn't crack! It was close there for a while. Right now, I'd let Lee Jean take half of our class, and I'd say good riddance. Howie turned his head to watch a passing skateboarder. Didn't see many of your fights. The one with Reinhardt, though? The one where I tricked him into letting me catapult his ass into a barrier and won? Or the next one where I refused to shield myself and practiced dodging instead and he yelled about it like a toddler? Second one. He can go rub his face in his own bullshit. If he really thought we owed it to each other to use our full strength in every duel, then he'd be firing his biggest shot at me instead of saving it for the higher ranks. Fatigue management is something we're supposed to be learning. I'm under no obligation to stand still holding a magic target out for him to destroy. The success of the Reinhardt catching trap he'd finally managed to try out had been the high point of class for Alden. Make a giant's bird nest shield, drop it over the archer's head, release preservation, and act like him getting tangled up in a ton of cordage is the only goal, and then when he shakes it off and takes a step onto the mess, represerve and fling him. Reinhardt had flown head first at one of the barriers and hit hard. Alden thought it was beautiful, creative, probably even historic. After all, how many rabbits were there in the universe who could beat an A-rank Meister in that particular way? Your cartoony idea worked? Flawlessly. He doesn't take me seriously enough to be careful. I told you it would work on him. I told a couple of people it would, and they all doubted me. How you brightened. Was it funny? So funny. You need to watch it. Reinhardt didn't appreciate it, as I'm sure you noticed. By the time the rotation had put them in a dueling block together again, the archer had been steaming mad, much madder than Alden had expected. He'd likely had a series of infuriating fights in between to stoke his temper. And as soon as Reinhardt had realized Alden had no intention of trying the seam tactic a second time, he'd flipped out. He wanted to prove he could blow up that bird nest shield, and Alden denying him the chance was the end of integrity, sportsmanship, and the world. Foxbolt cancelled our duel and set off that firework in front of his nose when he started digging at my rank. He ignored a text warning from her, she said. And then he tried to tell her it was just some trash talk. I think she was going to say that there was a line for that kind of thing and he was crossing it. But he went full baby and pointed across the gym at Max and accused Foxbolt of letting bees say whatever we liked while she picked on him. That was when the instructor had gotten fed up and sent Reinhardt off to work out his feelings by running laps on the track. Max is doing something different when he taunts someone, how you said. It's not venting. You're right, it's calculated. He makes people mad to make them stupid so that he can get them to walk into his spells. I think the instructors look at it like it's an extension of his powers. Reinhardt was talking shit because he couldn't control himself. If Max was talking shit, he was probably controlling himself and whoever his victim was. Alden was grateful that Max so far seemed content not to take that route during the times they faced off. He's always polite to me, said Hao-Yu. It's starting to make me nervous, like maybe he's luring me into a false sense of security so that he can get me really good in third year. Thank you so much for the new fear, Alden started across the street. I'll never be calm around him now. You're welcome. They entered North of North. It was full of all the usual sounds. Classical music played here at the entrance, footsteps echoed off glass and marble, a blender word, and the climbing wall just out of sight rumbled with a simulated earthquake. Hao-Yu looked over at the smoothie bar as they passed through on their way to the spa. Caveman Lee was drinking something purple beside a sign that advertised the new flavors for December. How long do you think Klein is going to make Lexi stay out at the track? I didn't see what he got sent out for, said Alden. Letting Ryther clip February after time was called. On purpose? Hao-Yu frowned. I know it wasn't like, I'll kill you, February, die! But it might have been like, oh look, Ryther's going to slice off one of February's ears, what a shame. Under the circumstances, I get how that could happen, but I doubt Klein does. Good thing Lexi likes running. Fabry deserves to be on the track himself, Hao Yu said. He was cat and mousing. He wasn't just trying out new strategies. He was coming at us in all those different ways because he's thinking about putting together a lead gene application. He was collecting good drone clips like Winston, only he's way stronger than Winston, so when he does it... He didn't need to finish the thought. Everyone in class who wasn't powerful enough for Fabry to be wary of had been victimized. Alden's opinion of the usually friendly agility brute was currently dark. An expectation had been growing in duels that the stronger opponent in a matchup that was a foregone conclusion would either end it quickly or modify their approach in some way to narrow the gap. The mercy of people who were still learning their powers could be kind of lacking or unintentionally terrifying, like Ignacio stalking you with his knives, but it existed. So having someone extend a fight they could have ended, forcing you to keep hopelessly trying against them for the full clock, was new, and it sucked. Alden had seen Victor bat at a roach 11,000 times before it finally let it die. The fights against Fabry had felt like that from the roach's perspective. Maybe cats don't know they're torturers because they've always been cats, he said. That's lovely for cats, but I'm sure it's a character flaw for humans, Hao Yu replied. Alden couldn't disagree. Let's forget about the shit show for an hour or two. I have enough non-MPE homework to keep me busy, and it's way less likely to tick me off. Not thinking about MPE drama was the right call. Unfortunately, it was harder in practice than in theory. Sitting in pricey recovery steam, eyes closed to discourage anyone other than Hao Yu from talking to him, Alden got through the recording of his Intro to Other Worlds lecture and wrote a paragraph to show Instructor Marion he was still engaging with the unexpected, even if he was missing some classes. But his thoughts kept drifting toward his fresh grievances with people he'd mostly gotten along with until a few hours ago. He'd started allowing himself periodic glances at the footage, and he was trying, in spite of his own better judgment, to figure out if there was some glaring moment when the class had turned for the worse. The atmosphere had been a little off from the beginning, but nothing too worrisome. The locker room had only had one topic of conversation, and that had been elites, what it would be who'd gotten in and who hadn't. Ignacio and Finlay were in. Constantine and Fabry weren't. Jeffy, who had been invited out for an educational swim by one of the divers he'd met during the submerger incident, was presumed to be out of the running too. The courier hadn't delivered a second letter to the room he shared with Max, Finlay, and Winston. Everyone had been saying the kinds of things Alden might have expected. Congrats, wish it was me, wish I was an S. If some of the must-be-nice statements from the A's sounded resentful, if Finlay wasn't hiding his pride as well as he could have, if Cohn's boisterousness rang false, and Fabry got too snappy about Reinhardt accidentally swapping their water bottles, it still hadn't fallen apart at that point. Ignacio didn't even care that he'd been accepted. His grandparents had a negative opinion of one of the faculty members who'd be heavily involved with the elite's program, so he didn't want to study under that person. When they'd finished suiting up and joined some of the girls outside the locker rooms, the awkwardness had grown. Toyette, Vandy, and Maricel were in. Jupiter was out. And the only thing Marcia was in was denial. She was so busy staring at her interface and looking around for couriers that she wasn't paying attention to her surroundings, which meant her surroundings had to watch out for themselves. A distracted S-rank with a glaive wasn't the best company to have in a crowded hall. Most of the girls seemed to already be annoyed with Vandy and Toyette for some reason. Vandy was too focused on checking that everyone was wearing their suits and cuffs to properly to notice, but Toyette was subdued. Astrid was being a little loud, trying to cheer everyone up. Before Alden could unravel more of the mood than that, Fabry had sidled up to Marcia and made a rather positive, commiserating remark about how Li Jean was missing out on both of them. "But we're not the same," Marcia had said absently. "You're already 16. Which would have made normal people laugh. Alden almost laughed. Marcia said 16 like it was a death sentence, and she was only weeks away from 16 herself. But these weren't normal people who laughed. They were Nessidorans, who had gotten into the habit of caring stupidly much about their ages down to the precise day. Apparently shaking the habit was going to take longer, even now that they were safely selected as high ranks. Fabry looked horribly offended, and a couple of people immediately began to sympathize with him about how that surely was the problem, and it was so unfair that he'd just missed the opportunity because of something he couldn't help. That might have made him feel better if it had been allowed to continue. But then Vandy chimed in to say that 16-year-old first-years from other CNH classes had been invited to the elites. And Jeffy arrived, bounding through the crowd wearing a long-sleeve shirt that said, "I sink and swim with the diving club," on his way toward the locker room. Marcia's hand shot out to grab the Aqua Brute's arm as he passed, and the sleeve ripped at the shoulder. It was an accident, judging by the way she jumped back like Jeffy had caught on fire, but Alden was already retreating in a hurry. Marcia moving quickly was engraved as a dangerous situation in his mind. My shirt! Sorry, I can sew it back together for you. Did you get an acceptance letter from the Elites program at Lejean? I just got the shirt from Yesenia. I've been watching her work on the big arch thing in the ocean. Did you get an acceptance letter? Marcia demanded, nostrils flaring. No. February looked relieved. But a man called me and said I was invited for an interview, Jeffy continued. He said we would discuss if being an elite was a good match for me and talk about what talents they'd expect me to take at each level. I don't think I'd like that, though. And my Nana... Alden knew beams of light were Soren's thing, but for a second he could imagine two of them shooting out of Marcia's eyes to pierce through Jeffy all the way to another, eliter campus. They still have slots, she said. Why, some of the A-ranks gasped at the news Alden couldn't fathom. They're interviewing people, Marcia cried. Vandy, did you see what she did to my shirt? Aren't you going to say something to her about... That means they're taking applications for elites, she was pumping her fist. Alden frowned. What flawless logic. The whisper came from behind him, from another person who'd beaten a retreat as soon as Marcia started grabbing people. Alden turned to see Max, who was now 17, truly ancient. I need the most amazing videos from gym today, Marcia had said. Then, to show Lejean, I hope we're having duels. In the sauna, on the other side of those duels, Alden pulled as much steam as he could into his lungs. Yeah, that could have been the start of the class falling apart. Actually, though, Marcia hadn't been more problematic than usual, at least not for Alden. Getting chopped like wood was getting chopped like wood. Maybe she'd been more brutal to worthier opponents. He figured he had enough of a grasp on how it had all spiraled now. Harsh duels had upset people who'd been okay at the start. Anger and hurt feelings made them less charitable when facing weaker classmates, and more sensitive to perceived slights by stronger ones. Wounded pride exacerbated wounded pride until the tone of the class was just rotten. I wasn't immune to it either. He'd been hanging on tight to his composure. At least I didn't have to put up with Winston on top of the rest. Alden hadn't seen what got the speedster sent out to run track early in the class. Checking the footage, it seemed like he had initiated an attack in the final second of a match against Heloisa, and failed to stop quickly enough after time was up. The faculty were zero tolerance on anyone ignoring the official end of a duel. Alden banished the video from his interface again. A second later, a strange noise from beside him made him open his eyes and look Haoyu, who was barely holding back laughter. His whole chest was shaking, and he was leaning forward with his hand over his mouth. What's so funny? He texted. Splat rain hard! Whee! Splat! There were too many people in here for Alden to guffaw. He pressed his lips together. I'm sending to Lexi. Cheer up while he runs. I didn't hear Lute mention that the Elites program offers potion therapy saunas after every gym class, Alden said later as the two of them stepped out of the building. So really, how elite can they be? That is true. Haoyu was drinking a smoothie called a chocolate snowman through a hollow peppermint stick. You and I are the actual elites. Out on the sidewalk, the smell of fried food and spices from restaurants down the street were making the ginger veg cookie flavor Alden had chosen to taste even weirder than it already was. Might trash this and go get fries or something. I want to walk for a while anyway. Sauna was good, but I could clear my head some more. Want me to take your duffel bag back to the dorm for you? Just entrust it to me. I'll use it to defend myself from any member of our class I meet who might be stuck in battle mode. Alden ditched the ginger veg, and Haoyu entrusted the duffel bag. Just as they were parting ways, Haoyu suddenly said, If you ever hear me talk about how I wish I was an S, it's not because I think higher ranks are better people. Alden turned back to smile at him. I wouldn't assume you thought that. Haoyu bit the end off his straw and crunched it between his teeth. I'm not power mad or anything either. It's just about tools. I don't think I realized that I really wanted to be able to catch up with my parents until the system told me I wasn't even on the right tier. Like, I got a bicycle instead of an airplane, and it made me take another look at where I was hoping to go. And I know it's not a place people bike to, but I'm stubborn. He shrugged. So if I do ever complain about my rank to you, it's like that. It's just stress. I get it, said Alden. Rank doesn't matter, except when it does. And sometimes it really does. No reason to pretend otherwise.